Elizabeth Barrett Browning, 1806–1861, was one of the most prominent English poets of the Victorian era. Her work is renowned for its emotional depth, intellectual vigour, and focus on social justice. Her journey from a secluded, sickly child to one of the most important literary figures of her time is both remarkable and inspiring.
Early life and education.
Elizabeth Barrett Moulton Barrett was born on March 6, 1806 in Durham, England, to a wealthy family. She was the eldest of 12 children. Her father, Edward Barrett Moulton Barrett, owned vast sugar plantations in Jamaica. Although her family had wealth, they were deeply affected by the moral issues surrounding slavery, which shaped Elizabeth's social consciousness. Early health issues. From a young age, Elizabeth suffered from chronic illnesses, which plagued her throughout her life. At around 15, she experienced a severe injury that left her an invalid, relying on painkillers and a reclusive lifestyle. Self-education. Despite her health challenges, Elizabeth received an impressive education. She was a voracious reader and studied Greek, Latin, Italian, French, and Hebrew. Her early exposure to the Romantic poets and classical literature deeply influenced her literary voice. Elizabeth started writing poetry at an early age. By 1838, her first major work, The Seraphim and Other Poems, was published. These early works were marked by an exploration of religious themes, combined with a deep sensitivity to the human condition. Her early poetry showcased 1. Religious intensity and the influence of Christian imagery. A focus on moral philosophy, often touching on subjects like grief, love, and suffering. An intellectual exploration of life, death, and the afterlife. After the death of her brother Edward in 1840, Elizabeth fell into deep despair, and her health further deteriorated. The tragedy, coupled with her reclusive lifestyle, led her to seek refuge in her writing. During this period, she moved to London, where she would remain largely confined to her room, continuing to write prolifically. In 1844, she published Poems, a collection that brought her significant fame. This volume attracted the attention of Robert Browning, an established poet at the time, and it eventually led to one of the most famous literary romances in history. In 1845, Robert Browning wrote Elizabeth a letter expressing his admiration for her poetry. Their correspondence led to a deep emotional and intellectual bond, and they soon fell in love. Elizabeth's father, however, was tyrannical and opposed to any of his children marrying. The couple secretly married in 1846 and eloped to Italy, where Elizabeth's health improved dramatically in the warmer climate. The Brownings settled in Florence, where Elizabeth would spend most of her remaining life. This period was one of her most productive, and she became a beloved figure in Italian literary circles.
Sonnets from the Portuguese, the 1850.
A collection of 44 love sonnets written by Elizabeth during her courtship with Robert Browning. Despite the title, these sonnets are not translations, but original compositions. She used the title to disguise their autobiographical nature. Some of the most famous sonnets in English literature, including How Do I Love Thee, come from this collection. These poems express a profound range of emotions, from intense love to insecurity and awe at the power of love.
Aurora Leigh, 1856.
This epic novel in verse is one of Elizabeth's most ambitious works. It tells the story of a young woman who pursues her aspirations as a writer despite societal constraints. It is widely regarded as a feminist text, reflecting Elizabeth's growing concern with women's independence, education, and rights. The poem also tackles issues of poverty, social reform, and the role of art in society.
The Cry of the Children, 1843.
A poignant social poem about the suffering of child labourers in factories. This work was instrumental in raising public awareness about the conditions of industrial labour in Britain and influenced political reforms.
Casa Guidi Windows, 1851.
Written from her home in Florence, this poem reflects Elizabeth's passionate support for the Italian independence movement. She became deeply invested in the cause of Italian unification during her time in Italy, and this work reveals her political sympathies. Elizabeth Barrett Browning spent the last years of her life in Italy, continuing to write prolifically. Her reputation grew, and she was considered one of the leading poets of her time. Her health, however, began to decline again in the late 1850s. She died on June 29, 1861, in Florence, at the age of 55. She was buried in the English cemetery in Florence, where her grave remains a site of literary pilgrimage. Elizabeth Barrett Browning is remembered as a poet who used her writing to address both personal and universal themes. Her poetry delved into love and the complexities of romantic relationships, as seen in Sonnets from the Portuguese; social justice, tackling issues like child labour, slavery, and women's rights in works such as The Cry of the Children and Aurora Leigh; spirituality, reflecting her deep religious convictions and grappling with questions of faith, suffering, and redemption. Her influence on later poets, including Emily Dickinson, was profound. Robert Browning continued to rise in fame after her death, but Elizabeth's literary reputation remains secure as one of the greatest female poets in English literature. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's life was marked by tragedy, love, intellectual pursuit, and social activism. Her literary output has inspired generations of poets and readers alike. By channeling her personal struggles and moral convictions into her writing, she created a body of work that speaks not just to her time, but to the enduring human experience.